We're on number 6 of page 101. Owing to the vital importance of having altar breads made in the way that the Church has ordered, it is evident that the task may be entrusted only to persons who are properly instructed in the regulations that concern this important work, and who are at the same time absolutely conscientious and trustworthy. As a rule, this duty is entrusted to religious of both sexes, and this precaution is recommended by the Holy See. But there are places that are reliable that make hosts. But you have to make sure that they're using only wheat bread and natural wine and all of that stuff, and sacramental wine. By the way, where did we get that wine from?
That was on Ziegler, York Science.
That's horrible. Do we have a lot of it?
Yes.
Oh, that's too bad. We'll have to get something else next time. 7. If the remedying defect in the bread. If the celebrant of Mass should find or should have sound reasons for suspecting in the course of the rite that the host which he is using is unfit matter for consecration, either because it is not wheaten bread or because it is corrupt, he finds it is moldy, you must act as follows. So that's real rare. The only time you're going to possibly find that kind of defect in the host or in the wine is in missions that get Mass maybe once a month or less, where they have not, stored them properly. But I mean, if you look at the host before you put it on the paten, you're going to figure out that it's moldy or not. See, so. But certain cases, sacristans set up for you see, and that would be a real rare case, though. See, but if a sacristan sets up and then you uncover the chalice and there it is, a moldy bread. I've never had that ever case, not ever. Sometimes though, wine that's on the turn I've had. Do you know what on the turn means? That means going bad. It goes to vinegar, ultimately. So you can tell when wine is on the turn if it doesn't taste right. But you can't taste it before Mass. Otherwise you can't say Mass. You can taste it 3 hours before Mass, but usually you don't have that time. But you can tell by smelling it, and when in doubt, don't. In other words, when in doubt about it, don't. So if you're in as I said, a mission where they don't get Mass very often, it's good to smell the wine before you. Okay. Also, for places that don't see Mass a lot, it is good that you use fortified wines. That means 18% wines, because they keep better. Also, putting them in the refrigerator does nothing for them. What does something for them is sucking out the air. All right. So if you tell the people there, make sure you get one of those devices to suck out the air. That will make it's the air that corrupts it. So putting a cork on it isn't going to do a lot of good. It might keep a day or two, but sucking out that air is very good. All right, so you have to watch the missions a little bit, because especially those that don't get Mass very often. If he discovers the defect before the consecration, he puts the defective host away outside the corporal and takes a fresh one, offers it at least mentally if the other had been already offered, without holding it up, and so with hands joined, and then continues the Mass at the point at which he had interrupted it. If, however, he had gone beyond qui pridie, he recommences from that point. So if you have to redo the consecration, you start with qui pridie. For any reason, if you have to redo the consecration. you start with Qui Pridie, which is the prayer just before the words of consecration. Yes?
For your Excellency, if the priest at some point need to come back and then do the consecration again, the server shouldn't ring the bells again.
No, because we don't want anybody to know that something went wrong with the consecration. No.
Yes, Excellency.
No, that would be very confusing and disquieting to the lay people. For example, you could bend over the chalice and realize that the wine is vinegar just from smelling it. See, that's conceivable. And you're halfway through the words of consecration and you realize this is invalid matter. Or we'll see a little later that you might flub the words of consecration. That happens occasionally. We'll see all of these defects. Flub means to mess up. All right. If the defective host had been offered at the offertory, it is to be treated with reverence, and after Mass consumed, if it is edible, or done away with in the sacrarium. You could always burn it too. If the celebrant discovers the defect after the consecration, but before the consumption of the precious blood, which I find hard to imagine, he lays the defective host, which must be treated as doubtfully consecrated, aside on the corporal, takes a fresh host, offers it without raising it up on the paten, at least mentally, takes it into both hands and consecrates it, beginning at Qui Pridie and ending at Corpus Meum. So you start again that way. He then lays it on the corporal, not genuflecting nor elevating the host, and continues the Mass where he had left off, omitting all the intervening actions and prayers. The defective host must be, if edible, consumed by the celebrant after the consumption of the precious blood, because it's doubtful. See, it's not certainly invalid. Or it may be given to another person who is fasting and in the state of grace, to be eaten, having warned him that the consecration of the host is doubtful. If it is not edible because it is moldy, it must be kept in some decent place, that is, locked up in a cupboard in the sacristy in a clean vessel, until it is certainly corrupted, and then it is thrown into the sacrarium or burnt.
How could it be defective but not moldy?
That you discover that it's maybe made of barley or something like that. In other words, there's something about it that is not right. You know, it has particles in it that would lead you to believe that it's not completely wheaten bread or something like that, where it's doubtful. That's a very rare case. Again, don't forget, this is made for cases where somebody might be setting up for you. The sacristan, who's blind or something, might be setting up for you, and you go in, you take the chalice, and you start Mass, you see, and that's. But if you're setting up, and you're supposed to set up your own chalice, it's not entirely correct that somebody set up for you. It's part of the ceremony. First you wash your hands, then you set up the chalice. So you know what the host looks like at that point. If you can't figure out what you're doing at that point, you should pack it in. All right. But these are very rare cases. The second host must be, of course, consumed with the usual corpus form, corpus domini, etc., to complete the sacrifice, even if the first one, which may be unconsecrated, if it is really invalid matter, had been eaten, and so the celebrant is no longer fasting. So because it pertains to the completion of the sacrifice, even though you're no longer fasting, you may consume it. Same is true for particles that you may find on the paten after the first ablution, which breaks the fast, because they are considered to be part of the sacrifice which needs completion, which is the consuming of the victim. That occasionally happens. You see something on the corporal, or and something on the paten, something that escaped, that blew up and went out onto the altar cloth, and that occasionally happens. Yes.
If you're in doubt about the priest host, but then you're consecrating a ciborium, could you just take one from the ciborium and use that after the consecration?
I guess technically you could. I mean, it's consecrated. You'd need a serious reason to do that, namely that you couldn't get any other large host or something like that.
Mm.
In a pinch, you can use a small host for mass. In a pinch, but it has to be a pretty big pinch.
Seems like it would be more discreet than a server going out, getting another host, bringing it up.
No things. You send the server back for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And most people don't notice that too much. I mean, they it's like, I forgot something. They don't think about it too much.
Mm.
If the defect is detected only after the consumption of the precious blood, even though the consecration of the wine had been valid, the celebrant takes a fresh host, offers it at least mentally, puts wine and water into the chalice, offers this at least mentally, and without raising the chalice from the altar. Then at once the celebrant begins the consecration, saying the words from Qui pridie into remissione peccatorum. So he does the entire consecration again, both species, holding the bread and the chalice in turn as usual, but without genuflections or any elevation. Immediately afterwards, the celebrant consumes the sacred host and the precious blood. He may repeat the usual forms, Corpus Domini and Sanguis Domini, etc. That's extremely rare. These are extremely rare cases. We'll see things that are less rare. The disappearance of a host. This is another one that's a very rare case. If a consecrated host should disappear by any accident, such as the wind or a miracle, or because it was taken by some animal, the mouse comes along and takes it away, and cannot be found, you never know. Another host is to be consecrated beginning from the Qui pridie quam pateretur, having been previously offered up as explained above. All right, so if you're saying an outdoor mass, that would be the wind could, and outdoor masses are not recommended. You should say it in some sort of a tent. Then you'd have jurisdiction. But it should be in some sort of protected situation. All right, the wine for the sacrifice. Wine, according to the ordinary opinion of men, is the fermented juice of the grape, and so an alcoholic liquor. Hence, a liquor from which all the alcohol is artificially removed or disappears by contact with the air, or be a synthetic liquor, whatever that is, chemically made, even though containing all the elements of wine, or a liquor produced from immature grapes, or from substances other than grapes, for example, apples, is not wine in the proper sense. Or, on the other hand, wine which becomes substantially corrupt and is no longer drinkable, or which is substantially diluted by the addition in a proportionally large quantity of other liquids, ceases to be wine. Again, there's some say 25%, some say 40%, some say 50% with regard to the addition of the water at the offertory. But again, if you take enough wine, you're not going to have that problem. if you're like some priests that put 2-3 drops of wine in, you're going to have to be careful. Now, some priests take very little wine, and that's dangerous in my opinion. In that case, you should use the scroop spoon. Yes.
Sure, Excellency, just going backwards a little bit. So concerning the consecrated host, if it was taken by some animal, then you find it, what you should do. I mean,
If it's not too disgusting, you should consume it. If it is too disgusting, then you should put it in the sacristy in a jar or something like that, and let it corrupt, and then throw it down the sacrarium or burn it.
yeah,
Once it corrupts, it is no longer the Blessed Sacrament. That's why those Eucharistic miracles, according to the Thomists, that is not the Blessed Sacrament, because it turns to flesh, and it's no longer the sacrament. It's a Eucharistic miracle, but it's no longer the sacrament. So you wouldn't adore it in that sense. Yes?
This is a little bit off topic, I guess, but in that case where you're storing the Blessed Sacrament, waiting for it to corrupt in the sacristy, do you have to keep a lighted candle next to it
No.
at all times?
No, that's why you see these tabernacle-like things in the sacristy, because you could even make that if you have to store the Blessed Sacrament someplace, like for Holy Good Friday or something like that. You can put them in those little sacristy tabernacles. But you have to put you have to put a lamp in front of it. You don't have to put candles, but you have to put a sanctuary lamp in front of it. Yes, definitely. And people coming in would genuflect. If it's a doubtfully consecrated host, you do not genuflect to doubtfully consecrated things, to doubtfully consecrated hosts. Yes.
And I guess if you're waiting for it to degrade, at some point it will degrade and it will no longer be the sacred species. So like at what point do you take away the lamp and do you stop genuflecting?
Well, at the point where in common human estimation it is totally corrupt. Yeah, I mean, it's as I said, our Lord, in placing himself in the Blessed Sacrament, I'm certain he foresaw all of the possible problems with it, and as long as you're acting correctly, in the sense that in common human estimation this is a totally corrupt thing, therefore I'm going to treat it as if it is not the Blessed Sacrament. See, that you're not in any way guilty of sacrilege. You're not hurting our Lord. He's not suffering, even if, let's say, he's still there. You're not making him suffer. Okay? Yes? No?
I'm sorry to be pedantic, but I'm just still wondering about this. Before it's totally corrupt, it would be doubtful, right? So it seems that while you're waiting for it to become totally corrupt, it shouldn't be treated like the Blessed Sacrament, right?
Yes, if it's doubtful, you do not adore it. In other words, it should be treated as a doubtful sacrament. It may be valid, it may not be. It's either one or the other. But it would not be subject to any kind of adoration. It shouldn't have a lamp in front of it or anything like that. All right. So, on the other hand, wine which becomes substantially corrupt and no longer drinkable. Okay, we said that. Accordingly, the rubrics declare that if wine is entirely soured or entirely corrupt, or a liquor made from bitter or immature grapes, or one to which water has been added in such a quantity that the wine is corrupt, that is, would no longer, in the common opinion of men, be wine at all. See, that common opinion of men is really the standard. Is this wine? It's not so much a chemical thing. Is this wine? The sacrament is not made. Canon law requires that the wine be the natural wine from the fruit of the vine, when work of human hands, and incorrupt, work of human feet. Yes.
I have a question about those Eucharistic miracles where the sacrament becomes flesh.
Yes.
So that couldn't possibly be our Lord's body, right? Because he died now no more.
Yes, because his body is in heaven and he's not suffering.
This would be something else.
It is something else, but it is a Eucharistic miracle. Yes. I mean, it should be treated with the utmost respect, but it is not the same thing as the Blessed Sacrament.
So it would be impossible that it couldn't be our Lord's body. Something we just don't know. It can't be, right?
No, because that would mean that he was physically there, and he can't be physically there if he's physically in heaven.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, I mean, matter cannot be. It's either one place or the other. Also, he wouldn't be in a suffering state. So, but I mean, that's a Eucharistic miracle to urge people to believe.
There was a case in down in Brooksville. This might actually, I don't know if this is that uncommon, but somebody received the Eucharist and then got sick and it came up, and Father Duterte collected it and put it in a bowl of water, and then put that just in the safe, and he said just wait for it to decompose. In that case, would you genuflect if you can clearly see the particle and everything?
Yes, I mean, if it's a valid particle, you would have to treat it as the Blessed Sacrament,
Yeah.
Till it's corrupt. So yeah, the vomiting kids is a problem. First communions are a typical vomit time. You give, she's all, or he, but usually it's a girl. All dressed up and looks very nice in the white thing, and then you give her Holy Communion, she turns around and vomits it, or she goes back to the pew and vomits it. They're upset and nervous, and that's a problem. I had one case of someone that received Holy Communion and then ran to the bathroom and threw up in the toilet.
Oh
And flushed the toilet, thinking that was the proper thing to do because she was sick. She didn't know any better. I just practically died when I heard it. I was in Michigan. Yeah. So, but it happens occasionally, and then dropping hosts. That's another thing. Yeah, that happens a lot. Yeah, talk about that. Hosts that get dropped. Yes. You have a question?
So what did you do, Your Excellency, with the host in the toilet?
Oh, it was gone. There was no way to find it. It went down the sewer.
Oh, she did flush it.
She flushed the toilet.
Oh, I thought you said she didn't flush.
No, she flushed the
Oh
toilet.
no. Okay. All right. But what would you do if that ever happens again? Like I'm saying for myself, being a priest, if someone in my
Well, if you
lifetime-
want to go skin diving into the toilet, I mean, you can't do anything about it. It goes into the sewer.
if they didn't flush it though, is what I'm saying.
If they didn't flush it,
That's what I mean. What
oh
would
gosh,
you do?
then you would. Oh gosh, I don't even want to talk about it here.
Maybe not with the recording, I guess.
Well, you would have to
Fish it out.
fish it out
Okay.
as best you could. But I think you should instruct first communicants about what to do if you do get sick, and do not receive communion if you feel sick. So, but first communions are because everybody's nervous, and the cameras are going and all of this, and isn't she cute and all that. They go and throw it up. So we'll see some of those things later on, but it's not uncommon. So that the wine for the Mass be not only valid matter for the making of the sacrament, but also lawful, it must be entirely incorrupt. And so the use of wine, which is even beginning to turn to vinegar, is unlawful. That should be B. Fully fermented. Fully fermented. Otherwise, it is not wine in the full sense of the term, and it contains elements which are not fit matter for the consecration. And C. Pure, that is, other substances, liquid or solid, for example, sugar, must not be added to it in any appreciable quantity. It is permitted to add some sugar to wine because it has sugar in it already. The way you can tell added sugar is look at the cork. If there are crystals on the bottom of the cork, you have added sugar. Generally, you don't see that on altar wine, but you do see it on commercial wines because sometimes the grapes are not. It wasn't the best year, let's say. And so they put some sugar in it. Make it taste better. Not the real fine wines, they don't do that, but ordinary, even decent wines, they'll do that. What may or may not be added to wine, and in what quantity before it becomes unfit matter for consecration, is a theological question. The rubric contents itself with saying briefly that if the wine is beginning to grow sour or to become corrupt or is somewhat bitter or is new wine or had been mixed with rose water or any other distilled liquid, the sacrament is made, but the minister sins gravely. However, it will be useful to notice the following points. The addition of another liquid, for example, water to wine in a notable quantity, for example, up to a fourth of the whole. He says that, others say different. Or even less in the case of a very light wine makes it at least doubtful matter, and its use therefore gravely unlawful. The addition of a small quantity of brandy is allowed, if necessary, to preserve the wine. See, that's a fortified wine. Brandy is wine. It's actually valid matter. You shouldn't use it because you would probably have to be helped away from the altar after the prayers, the Leonine prayers. To get up would be major. They'd have to get a few people to get you up. Drinking that, it just don't. You could do champagne. That's valid matter. Anything that's considered wine. If it's fermented from grapes, and brandy is. Now it has to be a true grape brandy, but all brandies. But those are usually 80 proof or better. It's 40% alcohol, maybe more. Not chartreuse, but that is not. It's not grape, obviously. But don't even think about that stuff. So, as the addition of alcohol is sometimes necessary to make the wine keep, especially if it has to travel, it is allowed if three conditions are fulfilled. A, that the alcohol be that extracted from the grape, not, for example, from potatoes or sugar. B, that don't put rubbing alcohol in it, you will be sick or die. That the total one is methyl. The methyl is rubbing alcohol. The other is ethyl. Ethyl is that's fermented ethyl alcohol. But it has to be from the grape. That the total percentage of spirit in the resulting mixture will not exceed 12% of the whole. C, that the spirit be added while the wine is very new, so that from the mixture of wine and spirit one substance will result by fermentation. For wine made from dried grapes, raisins, is valid and lawful matter if by its color and taste it can be recognized as real wine. So the Germans, for example, make wine, in the Rhine wine, or from raisins. It's a German. It's very nice, actually. Very nice wine. I forget what they call it. And again, that's very, very. The port is you can use up to 18%. That would be a port wine, but that too, you get a little, especially if I have a ciborium. big Sanborn. Get a little in your cups, as the Irish say. The reason why, it's just a historical thing, the reason why the British, if you notice, all of the port wines have English names, even though they're made in Portugal. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. Maybe you're not into port wines. The reason for that is that the British went on these big journeys with their navy, and they would stop in Portugal. Of course, they both hated Spain. Of course, so Portugal was allied with England all the time, and that wine would keep in their barrels all the way through their long voyages. So they would use the port wine. So most of those Portuguese wineries are owned by English. They have English names, Graham's and all these English names. Anyway, that's a little tidbit of information for you. The color of the wine, red or white or a mixture of both, is not determined, nor does its quality as wine make any difference if it is genuine wine. The instruction of the Congregation of Sacraments of 1929 recalls and repeats the precautions in reference to the wines for Mass that are recommended by theologians and rubricians. Precautions to prevent the corruption of wine, for example, by exposure to air, and precautions against fraud on the part of those who sell so-called altar wine, that's very rare, or on the part of those whose care the wine is confided. So typically you would see that altar wine is approved by the local bishop. See that it's got this, the approval. So some winery producing it has the approval of the local bishop. It is evident, therefore, that altar wine should be bought only from merchants of the highest integrity and confided to the care only of persons who are entirely reliable. I think you could probably use organic wine. There are some wineries that produce organic wine, and I doubt if they have anything in them that is not correct. Yes?
The altar wine cannot have anything that would preserve the wine artificially.
No preservatives, anything like that. No, you wouldn't want to drink wine that has preservatives in it. I mean, that's what you call box wine. Yeah, you wouldn't put it in your car. You know what I mean? All right. The water added to the wine in the rite. It is a matter of grave ecclesiastical precept to add within the Mass to the wine that is consecrated, a small quantity of water. This is not necessary for the validity of the matter of the sacrifice, but is ordered, as the Council of Trent observes, both because it is believed that Christ the Lord did this, and because from his side flowed forth water as well as blood, and by this mixture this mystery is recalled. And since in the Apocalypse of Blessed John, water represents the people, the union of this faithful people with Christ the head is represented by the mixture. All right, so we talked about that in the other part, that it is, most of it is that it's representative of the people, but there are other mystical reasons for it. So even though it's a little thing can become a great thing by association with some great principle. See if it has a mystical significance. So even though it's a tiny thing in the Mass, you're putting a little water in, it becomes a big thing. It's a general principle, by an association with something else. The water which is to be added must be natural water, rose water, or other distilled waters will not do, and the quantity must be small. So a few drops at the most. If you're good at it, you can do it with a cruet, but some cruets are terrible for it, so you have to know your cruet. And but the spoon is fine too. 2 or 3 drops suffice. It is dangerous to add 1 drop only, lest it adhere to the side of the chalice and should not mingle with the water. So you have to make sure that it gets into the wine, and that's why you do this with the chalice after you have put the water in, because you want to make sure that you get any drops that might be adhering to the side of the cup all in the wine. That's prescribed, at least by the authors, yes.
So he's using that term natural water again, and he's opposing it to distilled water. I think we're using reverse osmosis water.
I don't know what he means, but it's still natural water. It's just that you're taking out all of the impurities. I don't see how that's... I don't know what he means by distilled water.
Actually,
Yeah.
is it distilled when you boil it? Right.
Yeah, you boil, like we have distilled water down in
Brooksville. It evaporates it and then condenses it
Yes.
again, but by that point, all of the minerals and everything are stripped of it. So it's
But in common human estimation, it's still water, right?
well, yeah, but it's definitely there's definitely a big difference between it and I guess we would say natural water, like spring water.
Your Excellency,
Yes.
I wonder because he says rose water or other distilled waters.
Yeah, I don't think he's referring to...
No?
I doubt it.
Because rose water is not normal water.
Right,
It's a different type of water, and I think he's classing it
right.
differently.
Yeah, I think it's... I don't know what he's referring to. I don't think it's... Because H2O is H2O. I mean, it's water. You know, it has the form of water. So, it wouldn't affect validity in any case. Okay. The water is certainly converted into the precious blood, probably by the way of complete absorption into the wine. If the celebrant of Mass notices before the consecration of the chalice that he did not add the water to the wine, he is to add it then and there, but if he does not notice until after the consecration, he is not then to add it, for it is not necessary for validity, and nothing should be put into the precious blood. Yes?
Sorry, Your Excellency, what about sparkling water?
It's water.
All right.
You know, I think it would be somewhat improper to use sparkling water. For what reason?
I don't know if it's the only water that you have around and that you need to say Mass.
Yes, if that's the only thing you have and there's a necessity. St. Thomas says, necessity knows no law. That does not refer to the natural law, all right? It's not as if, well, my wife is a real, terror, and necessity knows no law, so therefore I'm going to shoot her. No, it refers to human laws, because human laws cannot foresee all circumstances, and so any kind of what we call positive laws. So necessity knows no law. So, but you have to have a proportion between the seriousness of the law and the necessity. See, that has to be proportionate. So. Certain things would be permitted if people are waiting for Mass who live in northern Alaska and they haven't seen a priest for 3 years, than if you were saying a normal weekday Mass. You see, there's no proportion there. Okay. The defects in the wine. Should the celebrant of Mass perceive before the consecration of the chalice, and even after the consecration of the host, that the chalice does not contain wine? How this could happen, I could never figure how that could happen. It might happen at a solemn Mass where the deacon is an idiot or something like that. I mean, that he doesn't put wine in the chalice, and he hands the chalice to the priest, and he thinks he has wine in it, and then covers it up. But it's conceivable, I mean, the deacon would have to be in outer space not to put wine in the chalice, and the subdeacon would have to be dumber than the deacon. And who knows what the MC is doing?
Yes,
Yes.
The MC drank the wine.
So I mean, it's a very unusual case, and that you would be so distracted that you would not go over to the side and in low mass and put the wine in the chalice. You'd be so distracted. I mean, you would have to be, just in outer space to do that, and then no one would say anything to you. Father, put the wine. They're just standing there with the wine. Anyway, that's what he says. Must put some in at once with a little water, offer it mentally, and consecrate it as usual, beginning if he had already consecrated the bread from the word simile modo. So you always use that paragraph before the actual words of consecration. If he perceives or has really good reasons for suspecting that the contents of the chalice are unfit matter for consecration, for example, sour wine, he empties them into a clean vessel, puts them aside outside the corporal, wipes the chalice, takes fresh wine and water, offers it mentally, and consecrates. After the ablutions, the liquor which had been put aside is consumed, if it is drinkable, or thrown away in the sacrarium after Mass, for its contents had been offered at the offertory and had been blessed by the sign of the cross. So it's a blessed object. If the celebrant notices that the matter is unfit after having pronounced the words of consecration over the chalice, he empties the contents into another chalice or into some clean vessel, if a chalice is not available, and puts it aside within the corporal. He then wipes the chalice, takes at the center of the altar fresh wine and water. That should be water. Offers it, at least mentally, without raising the chalice, consecrates it, beginning at simile modo, and without any genuflections or any elevation, continues Mass where he had interrupted it. The contents of the second chalice are to be consumed after drinking the precious blood, or with the first ablution. If, however, these contents are quite undrinkable, the chalice is put into the tabernacle, kept there until the sacred particle is entirely corrupt, and then thrown into the sacrarium. If the absence of wine or a defect in the wine is not noticed until after the celebrant has consumed the sacred host, or not even until after he has drunk the contents of the chalice, which are not the precious blood, and so break his fast, he takes a fresh host, offers it mentally without raising it. Next he takes fresh wine and water at the center of the altar without ceremonial actions except the sign of the cross over the water, offers it mentally, and then consecrates both bread and wine, beginning at qui pridie, without genuflections or any elevation. He then consumes the host, although he has already consumed another host, and the precious blood, even though he is no longer fasting, for the obligation of completing the sacrifice is of greater moment than that of communicating fasting. Yes?
When he says offers it mentally, does any mental act suffice, or do you have to use the
No,
the form?
just you offer it by an interior mental act.
Okay.
As remote matter of the sacrifice. Or, if the Mass, these are really rare cases though, if the Mass be celebrated in a public place where many are present, to avoid scandal, the celebrant need not again consecrate a host. He simply takes fresh wine and water, offers it mentally, consecrates it, drinks it at once, and continues the Mass. Should the celebrant not discover that the chalice contains unfit matter for consecration until he has already taken it into his mouth to drink, he must not spit out the contents, could you imagine? Not only because this would be unbecoming, but also because they contain the particle of the sacred host, but drink them and take the precious blood, even though he is no longer fasting. And later take the precious blood, even though he is no longer fasting. Should the celebrant discover the defect only after his return to the sacristy, he is not to return to the altar. There is nothing to be done. He has not celebrated the sacrifice. He cannot celebrate it now, for he is no longer fasting, and his new action, if he returned to the altar, would no longer probably be morally one with what preceded it. He has, however, communicated under the species of bread. 23. It may happen that a priest at the altar, having discovered some defect in the bread or wine, is unable to replace immediately the defective matter. For example, if he finds the wine is corrupt and there is no other wine at hand. If he discovers the defect before the first consecration, he must not continue the Mass. But if this occurs after the valid consecration of either the bread or wine, he is to continue Mass, omitting, however, the words and signs which have reference to the defective species, and making the signs of the cross, etc., that should ordinarily be made over both sacred species, over only the matter which has been validly consecrated. That's interesting. You would have to really think about that as you're saying Mass. This is extremely rare. If, however, by waiting some time, aliquam diu, the necessary valid matter can be obtained, the celebrant should wait for it at the altar in order that the sacrifice may not remain incomplete. All right. Now, we get into something a little bit more practical. The defects in the form of the sacrament. The words of consecration which constitute the form of the sacrament of the Blessed Eucharist are set forth in the Missal. The words used for the consecration of the bread are those with the addition of the word enim, used by Christ himself at the Last Supper, as they are found in the Gospels. Those used for the consecration of the wine are not the exact words of any one account of the Last Supper, but are a formula which was derived from the accounts of Saints Matthew, Mark, and Luke, from that of St. Paul, and from apostolic tradition, which gave the words aeterni and mysterium fidei. So those do not occur in sacred scripture, but they do, it's from tradition that they are said. Any change in the form by omission, addition, or interpolation which would alter its meaning would make the consecration invalid. Any other change, however small, even though it did not make the form invalid or even doubtful, is gravely sinful if deliberate. So if you in some way deliberately alter something, but not in such a way as to, if you deliberately left out enim, for example, that would not invalidate, but it would be gravely sinful. Which would be crazy to do, but if you did it. The form remains valid if indeliberately it is mispronounced through ignorance or through a defect of speech. Now, he's a little bit... other authors, I'm not sure what he means there, because you could indeliberately completely mess up one of the words where it means something entirely different. Remember, by changing the accent, the priest was incensed at Mass and he was incensed at Mass. He was incensed as he was being incensed. It's two different things altogether. See? So the other authors say, and that's why I have Merkel back, but I was trying to find it, that if you mess up the end of the word, it's not as bad as messing up the beginning of the word. If you said sacramento for sacramenti, or hoc estatem corpus meo, that would not invalidate if it was, and obviously done indeliberately. And how you could do that, I don't know, but whatever. See, that he's a little, is this referring to things that do not invalidate? He just makes that general principle that if it's indeliberate, but other authors will say that the words have to be pronounced correctly, but they do some human error in it, as long as the word remains substantially the same and there's no change of meaning, that it's okay, it's valid.